Hey everyone, I hope this podcast and my blog and books have been helpful resources for you and will continue to be. But if you've been struggling with a chronic health problem and are feeling stuck, consider coming to work with my team and me at the California Center for Functional Medicine. We work with patients all over the US and have experience treating a wide range of conditions, including GI problems, autoimmunity, hypothyroidism, cognitive mood and behavioral issues, weight gain and metabolic dysfunction, and more. Our unique model teams clinicians with nurse practitioners and health coaches, all of whom are trained in my ADAPT framework approach to provide a high level of care to our patients. This means more support between appointments, personalized guidance on diet, lifestyle, and behavior change, a cutting-edge patient portal with 24/7 access to your labs and records, handouts and resources to guide your protocols, and a team of practitioners working together on your case. We're currently accepting new patients, so if you'd like to learn more, visit chriskresser.com/become-a-patient. Hey everyone, Chris Kresser here with a brief message before we begin the podcast. Imagine a career that draws on your passion for wellness and disease prevention, that harnesses your ability to support and connect with others, that helps you to develop as a person while you help others to do the same. What if you could earn a living while making an impact on thousands of people's lives and even on the future of healthcare? That'd be pretty great, right? Well, that job does exist. It's the job of a health coach. And I believe that health coaches will play a crucial role in the future of medicine, not only in the US, but around the world. 1 in 2 Americans now has a chronic disease, and 1 in 4 have multiple chronic diseases. Chronic disease is destroying our quality of life, shortening our lifespan, bankrupting governments, and threatening the health of future generations. And our medical model is not prepared to address it. Why? Because the only way to prevent or reverse chronic disease is by changing our diet, lifestyle, and behavior. And conventional medicine is simply not set up to do this. Bottom line, we need people who can provide this support to help people make the changes they need to make to save their lives. We need empathetic and compassionate people with a skill for connecting and a passion for change. And my job is to make sure they have all the training they need to do their job so well they will change the future of healthcare. A career as a health coach can be incredibly fulfilling both professionally and personally. It really could change your life, and it can also change the world. That's why I'm excited to announce that we're launching the ADAPT Health Coach Training Program. It's a 12-month, 100% online certification that will prepare you for a successful career as a health coach. It includes training in core coaching skills, functional health, ancestral diet and lifestyle, and professional development. And it's unlike any other health coach training program currently available. To be notified when enrollment opens and to learn more about the program, visit kresser.co/success. That's KRESSER.co/success. Now on to the show. Hey everyone, it's Chris Kresser. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. This week, I'm excited to welcome Angie Alt and Rob Abbott as my guests. We're going to be discussing the very exciting results of a study they just completed looking at the autoimmune protocol and other behavior and lifestyle interventions as a potential treatment for Hashimoto's. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you may recall that I had Angie and Dr. Conagetti on to discuss the results of their study on the autoimmune protocol as a treatment for inflammatory bowel disease. That was the first peer-reviewed study on AIP that had ever been done, and this is now the second looking at AIP as an intervention for autoimmune disease, and I think there are already some others underway. So it's really exciting to see this formal research being done on a protocol that we've known anecdotally has been effective for many years. And this particular study was interesting because it didn't just look at the AIP diet, it looked at other behavior and lifestyle interventions. So I'm looking forward to talking with Rob and Angie about the results. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on, Chris.
So tell us a little bit about what you set out to discover in this study.
Well, yeah. So essentially, what we really tried to discover, I think folks in this space are probably familiar with how diets can impact chronic disease. And while we can be a little bit of an echo chamber in this space ourselves, it is getting out into the larger medical space. And so Angie specifically has been really pioneering work to look at the autoimmune protocol, or AIP, as part of a larger dietary and lifestyle intervention for folks with autoimmune disease, and was part of the first study looking at AIP and a lifestyle program for folks with inflammatory bowel disease. And that was back in 2017, I think, when it finally got published. And
yeah, we talked about that on the show. That was an exciting finding for sure.
I remember when I heard about it, it was, I think, through Angie and you, I mean, it blew up in the space, and I freaked out. I was like, this is so cool that this is being done. Researcher, clinician from Scripps, Dr. Kanajetti, was, interested to do it. And I still remember like reading the paper initially and not fully realizing that, Angie and Mickey had been a part of it, and seeing and stuff in the methods of the paper. Of course, I sent a message to like Mickey, and Mickey's like, oh, of course, Rob, duh. Like this was us. But after that paper came out, I thought it was just amazing. And so really wanted to connect, and I got to meet Angie and Mickey at one of the ancestral health symposiums. And we decided to kind of collaborate, as they had realized through doing some surveys of their audience that their audience really wanted more research, more evidence behind this approach for various autoimmune conditions, and to sort of bolster, hopefully, the push into the broader medical community. And it was just a natural partnership for me to sort of join the team and kind of bring a medical perspective, but also a layperson's perspective. And having grown up in medical school, reading your articles, Chris, and seeing how to translate some of the more nuanced science into a more lay audience description, but not lose its value. And when we started talking, I said, hey, it would be an awesome idea to do another study, because I don't want to wait another 5 years for some grant funding institution to finally come around and say, let's study this. And I was like, let's do this on our own, not fully realizing what it was going to take to do it, but just knowing that Angie had used her program before, and then we had the pieces. And so I came to Angie and Mickey and sat down and was like, hey, what do we want to study, and who do we want to study, what population? And so it was obvious we wanted to use her framework, the SAD to AIP and 6 online health coaching program that she used in the AIP IBD study and has been using for multiple years with great clinical success. That was going to be the foundation. And then we sort of said, well, also from our clinical experience and having had a couple of my own patients in residency go through the program with Angie with autoimmune thyroid disease, or Hashimoto's, and having a good clinical background of seeing those individuals do well in the program, made sense to study that population. Also, when you consider there's no other treatments outside of hormone replacement for folks with Hashimoto's, and the massive population that's affected, it just seemed clear that we needed to provide hopefully some evidence, for good or for bad, that this, you could do something besides just put people on hormone replacement. And to top it all off, I was looking at some of the literature, and you've probably seen this too, Chris, that hormone replacement isn't life-changing for a lot of people. Yes, it can be helpful, but a lot of people still continue with tons of symptoms. And so they're just really left out there to dry with nothing. Yeah. So I won't go, rambling too much further, but we essentially were like, we want to study this population. We want to use Angie's program, but we want to add even another twist. And I think the biggest point I want to make as we get into the conversation today was, this study was not a diet study. It was a personalized medicine, functional nutrition, and health coaching intervention. And I think one of the issues that I had, really the only major issue that I had with the first AIP to IBD study, was that the title focused too much on AIP and made it seem like, it was the diet. And it didn't give credence to Angie's program. It didn't acknowledge, unless you read in the paper and understood her program, that this wasn't simply handing people a recipe book and saying, do this. There was engagement, there was a community, there was all these other facets, which we know, multifaceted intervention, are important. But I felt that we really needed to utilize those tools that we're learning in this therapeutic context and use that for good, rather than this simply using the power of one tool, which is AIP.
Absolutely. Yeah, so important, especially with the very well-established connection between stress and autoimmune disease and sleep deprivation and, physical activity and the relationship that all of these inputs have on autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's and IBD. Super, super important. So how was the study funded and designed, given that you didn't go through the traditional process to get this done?
So, after we did this giant survey of our community with just thousands and thousands of responses, we saw, as Rob kind of said, that our community really wanted the research and they were willing to get behind it. So we decided that we would crowdfund to be able to do the research. And then also Rob partnered with Genova, and, they got behind us and obviously donated a lot in terms of testing. But we went out to our community and we said, hey guys, we have an opportunity to do this and will you support us? And we raised $12,000 in about 3 weeks.
So cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was really awesome to see that kind of support and to have Genova get behind us. And with that, honestly, the research team being willing to put in a lot of hours for, no pay.
Yeah.
but that's okay. That's an investment in the future that we were all willing to make. So we went for it from there. It was very lean, obviously, to do it on that budget, but we made it happen. And more than anything, I think knowing that our community was willing to get behind us like that was an awesome feeling.
Yeah, I love that model because this kind of science that is just not tainted by commercial interests that have a certain agenda and attaining a particular outcome. It's not to study a medication intervention is so valuable and necessary, and yet there's so little public funding available for it. But now we have this huge and growing audience of people who are what I call citizen scientists and passionate advocates for health and wellness and advancing our understanding of these concepts, who are willing to support these kinds of efforts. Like in an ideal world, our tax dollars would be going toward that, or at least part of them. But in the world we live in, that's not happening to the extent that it needs to. So it's so great to see that you leverage the interest and support of your community to make this happen.
Yeah, it was awesome to kind of get to do such a unique approach to it and show that we could eliminate kind of that conflict of interest and where the money was coming from and just go out there and do the science.
Cool. So how did you set the study up, given that it was a multifaceted intervention and you're not just studying the impact of a single, monotherapy like a drug? How did you set up the study?
Yeah, so we used the structure from the AIP IBD study, and I'll kind of go back and forth and call, the first study, the AIP IBD study, and our study, the AIP HT study. But we wanted to use as much of the original study design from that first pilot, recognizing it was a really good first rough draft, and it made sense from both a budget perspective and a practical perspective to use a single arm. So we knew going into it that we would have the limitation of not having a control group. So there would be no randomization. Everyone would be in an intervention. Blinding isn't really a realistic thing to do in a multifaceted lifestyle intervention, and it's also it's kind of irrelevant. So it's kind of a critique that isn't really valid. But we had a single arm, and we wanted to get around 15 to 20 individuals based off the budget size, and also having had experience with, for Angie, seeing the group dynamics. We didn't want a huge group, but we also didn't want too small of a group. And between 15 to 20 was sort of an ideal group size where people felt connected, but not overwhelmed by any one person, but also not, it's only 5 of us doing this. And we put out a survey once again, to social media with so much strict parameters. It's always challenging to try to balance when you're making the exclusion and inclusion criteria for who you want to study, to make sure you're not inserting too much selection bias, which is one of my pet peeves, that people hide selection bias and making inclusion criteria extremely specific. So I wanted to still make it broad but relevant. And so we ended up picking individuals between the ages of 20 and 45 with a history of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which for me, I just needed to either see that on a medical history form, proven from a medical record from a physician, or evidence of elevated antibodies. And it could be, the antibodies could have been just out of normal. I didn't care. We weren't looking for people with antibodies, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin antibodies, in the hundreds and hundreds and thousands, because I didn't want to have that bias. Mm-hmm. And we also took the safety precautions of, we didn't want pregnant women or breastfeeding women. And we also had the restriction for being either normal weight or just overweight. So BMI less than 30, essentially 29.9. And that one was more of a safety mechanism, because I've seen Angie's program and I knew it was going to work. And so I wanted to minimize knowing people's thyroid medication would change. And I wasn't able to provide direct care for the participants like I would in my own clinic. I wanted to minimize potential massive weight loss over the intervention, and the need to be monitoring thyroid during the intervention itself. So we wanted to get people who either were normal weight or overweight, which some people said, and I agree, people with Hashimoto's have problems with weight, and America has problems with weight. So there was a substantial group of people who we couldn't enroll because they didn't fit the BMI category, but it was more from a safety perspective. And I still would, while maybe not completely generalizable, I would still generalize some of the findings, as we'll talk about later, to that group. The age restriction was also to try to minimize the menopausal hormone effects of confounding on, was there other perturbations for someone in their, late 40s or mid 50s. And so we took the 20 to 45, also knowing that's typically the age range when people are diagnosed or affected with Hashimoto's to begin with. So we identified a population that, while specific, was, I think, a good representation of who is most disproportionately affected with Hashimoto's. If we had just studied old Black men and found results, I would have been pretty poorly designed and wouldn't be generalizable, because it's just a small fraction of individuals who are affected versus, middle-aged, we ended up getting just women. It opened to men and women, but just ended up getting women. But that population was potentially, when you're going to do a pilot, best representation for the wider population. And we also, in doing it on social media, were able to get people across the country in multiple states. And so we had, I think, 12 or 13 states represented. There are a couple, multiple people from California and Virginia and Texas, but we had actually a good spread of individuals across multiple states, which, given a small sample, is pretty awesome to be able to even get that diverse of a group with only 17 people getting enrolled. So we had 17 folks, and the main questions that we wanted to ask in this study were combining subjective and objective outcome measures. So the main thing, and what I am interested in, and you probably agree to, Chris, is I want to see the patient actually see subjective improvement, either in their symptoms, their quality of life, some parameter that means something to them. And so our primary outcome was improvement in quality of life using the SF-36, which is a pretty comprehensive quality of life questionnaire. It's pretty well validated. And as a secondary outcome, we also included the MSQ, or Medical Symptom Questionnaire, that was developed by Jeffrey Bland through the Institute for Functional Medicine, which I find, and probably many people in this audience find, very helpful in the clinic to objectify in some way someone's symptom burden. So those were the two main markers. Subjective, yes, but we had to find some way to objectify the person's experience. But knowing that if we didn't see any improvement there and we saw objective improvement, I actually wouldn't care as much, because I really wanted to see people feel better. Now, that being said, we obviously did measure thyroid antibodies and hormones. So we had a full thyroid panel to look at all hormones, as well as the TPO antibodies and antithyroglobulin antibodies. And I did a priori have a hypothesis that we would see, having seen patients before need less medication and have increases in hormone, that we would see TSH drop, that we would see hormones change in a way that people would not need as much medication, and that maybe in the short period of time, antibodies would even drop as well. And the whole study itself was designed to only last 10 weeks. So it's a really short time period. I would have loved to study a longer period of time, but we didn't really have the budget to keep doing labs every, 6 weeks or 10 weeks. But even within 10 weeks, we thought maybe we'll see a decrease in antibodies. And then the last two markers that we had from a statistical structure and outcome measure was, and I didn't really have a priori hypothesis before the study looking at this, because it's not a study population that I this marker is routinely used in, but I wanted to somehow quantify inflammation. So we ended up using high sensitivity C-reactive protein as some non-specific marker for inflammation, knowing that if someone was not acutely sick, this marker shouldn't be elevated, shouldn't be abnormal. So we wanted to follow and see if we could see some immune modulation, this HSCRP, or we also use a complete blood cell count, which had a differential. So looking at white blood cells, lymphocytes, eosinophils, monocytes, that kind of thing. So I had those markers to see, would we see any kind of immune modulation? Interestingly, the last thing I also included, which I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, but I've always been really upset about these studies looking at vitamin D and changes. And I just think that there's so many variables that can impact vitamin D that even to say if you put someone in a hospital and control everything to say that, your intervention changed vitamin D, it's a little bit of a stretch. And it's just, to me, it's like irrelevant anyway, because it's in a hospital. But I actually included it because I have seen a lot of patients come to me with really high vitamin D because it's like a universal medication to take.
Everyone's taking a good dose of it. Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, from a safety standpoint, I kind of knew the population we might get. So I actually included that on there, but I didn't have once again, there's no reason to have any kind of hypothesis changing because there's just so many variables. And we did end up finding some people that had like vitamin D's in the 80s, 90s that even had high calcium. And so I was able to actually help them to mitigate that. But the quality of life questionnaire, the symptom questionnaire, and the thyroid panel were the main outcome measures and things that we were looking at. And we did labs at the beginning of the study. And 10 to 12 weeks later, we repeated the labs again and wanted to see how they changed.
Great. So tell us what you found.
So I'll go a little bit and then I'll let Angie talk a little bit more about the dynamics. And so what we ended up finding was in the beginning, the average antibody level, and I put this in context with some of the results, the average antibody level was TPO antibody was only around 200. And I love maybe your thoughts on this, Chris, but for me, clinically, like around 200 is a pretty good clinical win. And I didn't know what it was going to be before. We talked about, I didn't know what people's levels were. They just had to be somewhat abnormal when we enrolled folks. So I saw that at the beginning and I was like, I don't think, before the study even started, I don't think there's going to be a way we're going to see a decrease in just 10 weeks if we're starting at 200 versus 1,000. But then again, if we started at 1,000 and it came down to 500, was that your intervention or was that, just them getting back to regression to the mean? But the average antibody level at the beginning was only 200 and average TSH in the beginning was around 2. So we had a pretty good, sample, pretty good average.
Yeah, would you speculate that was due to the population that you were recruiting from, which is a population that already has a pretty high level of health awareness, given that they're in Angie's community?
Yes, I would completely agree that we did a food frequency questionnaire in the beginning while it's wrought with all sorts of peril, especially the first one that was asking them to look at their diet over the last year. Pretty generally, when I looked through everyone's food frequency questionnaire, it represented a diet that I would call above average. It was definitely not standard American diet. It wasn't AIP, it wasn't even strict paleo, but it was better than average. And then when you started to talk with people, and Angie can probably provide more insight within the group, we were starting with people that were doing a lot of stuff right or had done stuff right and had heard about AIP and believed that it would work. As another sort of original critique was, why would you enroll people that, they had an expectancy? Well, you're not going to, from a lifestyle change standpoint, if the person doesn't believe that it's going to help them, then it's stupid to enroll people who don't know what it is or don't believe it's going to work. So,
and the other thing is that placebo controlled model comes out of studying monotherapies and drug interventions.
Correct.
Really relevant or valid in a model like functional medicine where you are using multiple different interventions. And, I think in that case, perhaps if with a longer study and a bigger budget, comparing against the standard of care is what makes the most sense. And I know that's what Mark Hyman and the folks at Cleveland Clinic are doing in a lot of their research, because the whole placebo-controlled thing is an artifact of drug trials.
Correct. Yeah, and that's exactly how, if you're going to design and how we're hoping to design future studies, is having a control arm that either is, a waitlist group or is receiving the continued standard of care that they're already getting, or maybe, is getting some slightly different dietary treatment. But when you have all these multi-faceted elements, it's just silly to try to ferret out which one's doing what. And people are probably familiar with, Dr. Dean Ornish, who probably pioneered this field of studying lifestyle medicine very rigorously. And if you go and talk to him, and I'm sure you're probably pretty good friends with him, Chris, if you go and talk to him and people have, just giving him all sorts of crap for, oh, your low fat, plant-based vegetarian diet you're killing people by not giving them fat. But if you ask him the most important element of his intervention, he'll tell you it's love, not the other elements. It's the connection. It's this loving compassion of the group, both within themselves and being cared for. And so I say all that to once again say, like, this is a complex intervention. Functional medicine's complex, so it doesn't make sense to study it in a way that is used for supplement trials or drug trials. But
yeah, and to be fair, there are downsides to this method of research that we're talking about and Dean Ornish's studies, because he has used some of those studies to claim that the low fat, higher carbohydrate plant-based diet is what was responsible for the outcome in those interventions. And you can't know that that's true, or you can't know that that's not true.
Not true.
Based on the way that those studies were designed. What you can say is that, a multifaceted intervention that involved X, Y, Z was effective compared to whatever it was being studied against. And I think then you could design further studies that would just compare single elements of those interventions. So you compare, for example, the low-fat diet versus the low-carb diet. And of course, those studies have been done and are being done. So it's still useful, but it's just important, I think, to be objective and recognize the strengths and weaknesses of various research designs, as I know you did in this case.
Yeah, it's all about making the appropriate conclusion, and I want the community too to hear as we get to that point later in the podcast. We want to make sure we make the appropriate conclusions from our research and be positively critical. Don't say it's something that it's not, and see it as a rough draft to make future changes. But and so coming back to the results across the group for both the thyroid hormones and thyroid antibodies, we didn't see any clinically or statistically significant changes. Big Pharma could have come in and said that was actually a positive because people didn't get worse, but I won't say that. We didn't say that. So we didn't see things as a group, but 6 out of the 13 women. So one woman was unable to finish the study because she actually got pregnant. Pretty awesome reason to get kicked out.
Absolutely.
And that was towards the end of the study. So 16 women, 17 finished. And while we didn't see any changes statistically when you looked at a group or clinically at the thyroid hormone or antibody levels, we did see that 6 out of the 13 women who started the intervention on hormone replacement medication decreased their medication by the end of the study. And in some cases, a couple of people actually decreased at the beginning and decreased even more at the end. And this was all based off of the testing that we performed and clinical symptoms and monitoring from their local physician. And so that's a huge percentage. And there was even other people, when you look at the individual statistics, which I tried to include everything raw in the paper so people could see what we did, because one of my pet peeves, there's a few of my pet peeves, is
absolutely my pet peeve.
I hate trying to figure out from one figure what was studied and what was interpreted. And so I wanted it all to be there so people could be their own critical citizen scientists. And even the figures that we used, I tried to include the raw data, and because we had few enough people, it didn't get too nuts to have on one figure. So you could see, there's kind of an outlier there, or this is that. So you could be a better critical judge rather than artifactually making some weird figure and just things that misrepresent the data. But so almost half the people on replacement decreased medication. And some people who even had, TSHs in the beginning that were up in the 4s came down into the 2s. So they didn't actually decrease meds by the end of the study. My guess is they probably were going to decrease them soon. They saw, big decreases in their TSH. And a couple people even specifically, when you looked, I wanted to see, was it just weight loss? And there was weight loss across the group, both clinically and statistically significant weight loss, both in the whole group as a whole and even the overweight group. But a couple people needed less medication and they didn't lose weight. The TSH dropped, they didn't lose weight, or someone had a big TSH drop and they lost a couple pounds. And this is self-report. You have to take it for what it is, but at least from a self-report, I couldn't explain these changes. And one woman even was on T3 medication at the beginning of the study and had no T4. And I told her, you have to get your prescriber to give you T4. This is not safe. I get her labs back at the end of the study and I ask her, she's got some T4 now. And I'm like, so what did you start taking? And she's like, I'm taking a little bit less T3. And I was like, what? You're not taking any T4? And so my hypothesis for her was maybe there was obviously a suppression effect because she was taking a little bit less T3, but her thyroid started making T4 again. So both the intervention, I can't say what, the intervention plus a little bit less suppression, but there was enough of these cases mixed in there that it was clearly this decrease in TSH in individuals or need for less medication was not just from weight loss. For some people, it had an impact, but even as a group, it was an average around 6 or 7 pounds. So we're not talking about 20 pounds, which we tried to avoid by not having obese individuals. So, but when you look at that level, I'm not trying to like artifactually create something that doesn't exist. I'm just telling you what we saw on the individual level. It's pretty remarkable. And I don't know if, Chris, you probably have some reflections, but Angie, you'll probably provide some even further insights, working with the people day in, day out, and we can get into some of the other results. But that was pretty awesome stuff in a 10-week intervention.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And it matches very well with my clinical experience, having done this for over a decade. Typically what I expect to see when we first start working with someone with Hashimoto's is, and we put them on AIP or a similar nutrient-dense anti-inflammatory diet intervention, as well as the lifestyle modification, is an improvement in TSH. And actually, the talk we have to give, as you did, Rob and Angie, is, hey, whether someone in our clinic is the prescribing physician or someone else, you have to be in touch with them, because what often happens here is as you reduce the inflammatory burden, your thyroid function is going to improve, and it's going to start producing more endogenous thyroid hormone. Therefore, the dose that you're on now of your thyroid medication is going to likely be too high, and you might start to experience hyperthyroid symptoms in some cases because the dose now that was necessary for you before you started this intervention is now too high. And we don't say anything to them about expecting a change in antibodies in the first few months. And I think one of the reasons for that is that studies have shown that antibody production can often trail what's happening clinically by a few weeks or more. So the changes that I make today, like if I have Hashimoto's and I make changes today, that's not going to show up my antibodies tomorrow. It might be 3 or 4 weeks or even more before my antibodies drop.
Yeah, that's totally true. It was lucky, I think, for Rob and I, because we had partnered in the past on patients that he was seeing in his clinic, and then he asked them to enroll in my program. And we already had the experience of, one of his patients in my program coming to me and saying, oh, I feel badly now. I'm starting to have probably hyper symptoms. I don't think this is working. And then, I could say, oh, well, I think it actually is working. That's why you're feeling this way. Yes. Let's go back to Dr. Abbott and have an adjustment in your medication. And sure enough, that was the right approach. So we were well prepared for that with the women we were working with in the study.
Yeah, I imagine that helped too, because some people might have dropped out or, not made those changes. And that's why we're always very careful to alert people to that up front, because it can avoid outcomes that wouldn't be desirable because they know what to expect.
Right, exactly. They're less anxious and they're more prepared for how things might change.
Yeah. So, Angie, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the specific case studies, because I think that can help bring this to life. Oftentimes, when we're looking at a study, we're just looking at data and averages. We're not looking at the experience of individual people. And I think I always love to talk to the researchers because I get a lot more kind of color in life in terms of what actually happened in the study and how the intervention affected people. So can we, maybe share a few anecdotes from particular people in the study?
Yeah. Gosh, there was so many kind of special little things that happened along the way. I'm trying to focus on a few of them. I know one thing that we ran into, because we had also Genova's lab behind us and some more kind of specialized, kind of functional medicine type of testing, we got to see things that I didn't get to learn about when I participated in an IBD study. And through the organic acids tests, we got to see things like heavy metal issues and things like that come up for women. And we had, Rob, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong here, But we had at least 1 or 2 women who actually came into the study with some heavy metal issues. And when we got those results back, we met with those women. And because this is a study that's totally dietary and lifestyle focused, we weren't going to do anything outside any, specialized protocols to try to address that. But we made recommendations to the women, like increasing things like, parsley and cilantro in their diet, kind of adding those herbs in where they could. I think I encouraged a few of those women to blend those fresh herbs into their bone broth, find ways to bring it into their diet a little bit more frequently. And at the end of the study, when they had those tests repeated, we found that they didn't have that heavy metal toxicity anymore. And that was just by adding herbs over a 10-week period. I was really blown away by that.
Yeah, we didn't do a formal statistical analysis from components of the organic acids, mainly because it was all exploratory and it would have to be for a second paper anyway.
For research purposes only.
Yeah, because we designed the study without even having them, and it was a generous donation from Genova that helped us to use that in a kind of more specialized functional medicine intervention, which we can talk about. But yeah, so I looked at women in the beginning, and we used the Genova Diagnostics NutriVal with toxic element screen. So it included whole blood arsenic, lead, mercury, and cadmium. And as Angie said, we had no scope to be able to do any kind of fancy detoxification intervention. But a lot of folks came up in the beginning, and you can take this for what it is. It's just a whole blood sample. It's not a urine provocation. It's just what's in the blood at that time based off of Genova's reference ranges. And several women came back with kind of high mercuries, and some had dental amalgam, some didn't, and it was, seafood. But mercury seemed to be a problem. And a couple of people even had, lead show up as an issue. And so we made note of it, as Angie said, with folks, and gave some, what I seemed like maybe inconsequential small changes, but maybe something to maybe psychologically help them feel like they could detoxify. And I figured at best, like we'd see a 50-50, wash, like maybe some people would go up, some people would go down, just statistical noise from this. But almost universally, and I don't have a statistical calculation on this, and so you can just take my word for what it is, but almost universally looking at it, anyone who was high came down, either still staying out of the normal range or even becoming normal. There was nobody who went from essentially no toxicity to toxicity. And so I don't know what to make of that fully, because it is just sort of a single time point test. It's a whole blood test, but it was fascinating to me to see that clearly there was something going on to get detoxification systems online and aspects of this intervention, because the whole blood mercury that was there in the beginning was not. And this was just 10 weeks, and these people didn't move. They didn't change anything radical. And even just if you had stopped eating tuna, as much, that still wouldn't have had a big effect, at least in my opinion. And so that was kind of just a fascinating, unexpected finding from the NutriVal. And
actually, not unexpected for me. I can't remember, some time ago somewhere wrote something on my blog, in the practitioner training program. I'm not sure. Rob, maybe you remember from the ADAPT program, but there are actually studies that correlate mercury exposure with thyroid antibody production. One from NHANES actually looked at data from 2007 and 2008, I believe, and they found women with the highest blood mercury level showed greater odds for higher thyroglobulin antibody production. And I've seen this, similar findings for lead and arsenic, I believe. And it makes sense. I mean, we know that these metals cause inflammation and oxidative stress, and that the thyroid is particularly susceptible to that. So it's definitely one of the things that I explore in my patients with Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've never been in a situation where I was able to see those laboratory changes myself, and that was really cool to watch that. I think in terms of other case studies, even though she didn't get to finish with us, obviously our participant who came into the program dealing with infertility and really having a high personal goal to perhaps, restore fertility and become pregnant. obviously having
I was going to ask you that when Robin mentioned that she dropped out because she got pregnant. What was going through my mind was she trying to conceive and then not able to conceive, and did this intervention help with that? So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it was about week 9. She came to us and said, "Hey, you guys, I don't think I can continue this study because I'm pregnant."
Yeah, that's
we were like, yeah, we were like, well, we don't mind that at all. That's amazing. But not totally unexpected for me either. I've seen that happen over the last 6 years several times during the course of my program. And it even happened with a younger woman who had very premature ovarian failure. And she even got pregnant, which absolutely floored her doctors. And so that was really exciting. I was very
take
happy.
all of those infertility diagnoses with a big grain of salt, because I've learned over the years and Rob Wolf used to talk about this a lot, where when people would come to his gym and he would start advising them on diet, get them on a paleo diet, get them working out. If they were young women, he would say, he would ask them about conception and birth control, because what he found was so many women would just get pregnant, and they weren't necessarily trying to, but they had not been getting pregnant with, not using birth control or paying much attention to it. And then, when they clean up their diet and address their physical activity and, start improving their health, all of a sudden the body's like, oh, hey, all right, things are cooking now, and it's now we can do this. And I will often warn my young female or women of childbearing age of that too, especially if they're not planning to do it to get pregnant, to watch out and pay more attention.
Yeah, I've definitely adopted the same approach over the years, Chris. I would say to them at the beginning, pay attention, ladies. So those of you who aren't planning it might have a surprise, and for those of you who are planning it, you might achieve the goal.
Right. So I'm rewinding a little bit because I just had to look something up here. So yeah, I'm looking at a study of, I mentioned the mercury and NHANES, and then this is from the journal Environmental Pollutants, lead and cadmium exposure, higher thyroid antibodies and thyroid dysfunction in Chinese women. They found correlation between lead and cadmium levels and higher TSH and hypothyroidism and higher antibody production in women. Yeah. And then there's a whole bunch of other studies. If you look and, if you pull that one up, you'll see tons of similar articles along the same lines. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's one of the things that is often unexplored. And it's one of the reasons that the conventional approach to treating Hashimoto's is so lacking, because it's the classic example of symptom-based disease management, where the dysfunction, the ultimate effect of Hashimoto's is hypothyroidism, is low thyroid hormone. So the intervention is then thyroid hormone, just give thyroid hormone without any attention on why the thyroid hormone is low in the first place and what's causing that. And Rob, this is probably a good segue. You are, among many other qualifications, you are an ADAPT trained practitioner who has studied functional medicine, and this is the approach that you are bringing to your work and the study in particular. So how did the ADAPT practitioner training inform the way that you looked at this, designing the study and the outcomes? Yeah, well, I definitely, I'll keep the story short. I don't want to, embarrass you, Chris, but my story even getting into this space is nuts. Over 6.5 years ago, I was a patient myself, having stopped medical school, not knowing what was going on with my life. And I came across Chris's podcast actually in the hospital and started listening to it, and just like light bulbs went off in my head. Like, this is how I'm going to get myself better. And this is what I'm going to do to help people when I come back to school. And so I went through all of school knowing, all of traditional medical school knowing this was the approach I wanted to take. And before I even, met Angie and Mickey in person, I was, handing out some of your articles to patients in the hospital, handing out, books and recipes. And that was You were that annoying guy.
I was, eventually my attendings stopped caring, because they're like, he seems to really care about these people. He's probably doing something helpful. But then, I got the lucky opportunity between my fourth year of medical school and beginning residency to be a part of the ADAPT program. And it was a great time period because my fourth year it's the easiest year of medical school by far. It's, all this elective time. I was doing research, actually had time to really pour myself into the program and then put it into practice too in residency to some limited extent. And the structure of how to really, it's all conceptual framework. I mean, there's some beautiful pearls on how to really practice the clinical medicine, day in, day out, which isn't always necessarily taught through like the Institute for Functional Medicine. But I had some good core protocols, but it was more the conceptual framework. How do you think about these things? What types of questions are you asking? And it helped inform how I did my notes and, created treatment plans. And I had beautiful handouts that I could give to people that you provided in the program, which was, talk about a work that you don't want to do on your own when there's something already there. I did not want to reinvent that wheel. So I had some beautiful resources, but it really was a conceptual framework of what kind of questions to ask people and to honor their story. And so I carried that through residency and recognized too that was going to be a valuable piece for our intervention. And so I actually met with the women at the beginning of the study individually, all virtually, and went over their initial lab testings, their lab testing findings, their goals, and told them, we'd be meeting again midway through the study to go over some of the more nuances of the organic acids test and the stool test, still making just dietary recommendations. We weren't going to do anything, high-level intervention. And then met with them again at the end of the study to go over the final results. And so had this constant individual functional care. And in between there, Angie and I and the other health coach, Andrea Hirsch, we met together to kind of go through everybody and come up with those goals for people and all be on the same page. So it was just this wonderful multidisciplinary team dynamic, which now, when I first did the ADAPT training, the health coaching program hadn't come out yet, but folks are now in your, ADAPT health coaching training. And so what this intervention became was basically just blending really personalized functional medicine with an integrated, I say that because we were communicating together, not just integrative, but this integrated approach where I could communicate with Angie and Andrew doing continuous sort of health coaching with the group in a community setting. And it's just, I start to get speechless when I realize like the implications of what we studied. And wow, I don't want to go jumping and say everyone needs to do this, but we are validating the personalized care movement. We're validating the principles of functional medicine. We're validating the role of health coaches, and we're validating the reason to do it all together. And Chris, you're basically, just preaching to the choir here, but you're training folks to basically embody these roles, to play these roles for people in different ways. And it's got to be the future. But this study, and hopefully future studies that we design with this multidisciplinary structure, are beginning to show the efficacy for multiple chronic immune conditions, autoimmune conditions. And we have to use this. We have to use this structure. So I'll stop there because like I said, I'm running out of words, but it's so awesome to me.
Yeah, kudos to you both. This is study. I was super excited when I heard about it because it really is a manifestation of the vision that I've had for a long time of this collaborative practice model where you link licensed clinicians that are maximizing the scope of their practice, ordering tests, interpreting the results, prescribing treatment, with the support of allied providers like health coaches who are working in the trenches, day to day with people to actually support them in making the changes that need to be made. And that is the only way forward here. We'll never have enough doctors to address chronic disease, and they're not arguably the people who should be working, intensively with people to make the changes that are required because they don't have the time or even the training to do the diet, behavior, and lifestyle support. That's the job of a health coach. And likewise, health coaches are not trained to order and interpret lab tests and prescribe treatment and do procedures and the things that doctors do. So putting them together in this way and then tying that to, a solid and rigorous research that can prove the outcomes is just, it's amazing. I'm so excited about what you guys have done. And Angie, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective as the health coach in this intervention. We just heard from Rob, from a physician's perspective, and how was it for you to be involved in this and working with patients and working with Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome model. I mean, for me, it's a dream come true situation. Since the beginning, when I started my health coach training and then eventually went on to add nutritional therapy training to it, and started working with people, and then realized that the best way for me to leverage what I was doing would be in a group setting, and then to culminate in this opportunity to get to work side by side with the doctor and really take the load off of his shoulders in some ways, and let the best of his skills and expertise really shine and come through for these women. And then also in turn have his respect that I knew how to do this piece of leading them through the process. And we could communicate in real time about that and pivot as needed for the patient's needs. That's an awesome feeling, and the outcomes speak for themselves. It's obviously clear that doing this model is best for everyone. I think health coaches can essentially stand in the gap. We're the bridge between the patient and the doctor, and we're where the real life stuff happens. And that's not the best use of the doctor's time, but it's a great use of our time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, it allows you to work on a multidisciplinary team. It recognizes you as a legitimate healthcare professional who has a lot to offer. And, that it is an essential member of the team. And especially with interventions like this, if the intervention is just a drug, what is a health coach doing? Other than
medicine this morning,
and there are actually health educators that help ensure that people do that. And I'm not saying that's not valuable, but in a medical model where you have these multifaceted interventions that are diet, behavior, and lifestyle based, health coaching becomes absolutely essential, because we know that only 6% of Americans currently are following even just the top 5 health behaviors identified by the CDC, much less a more rigorous protocol like AIP that also involves stress management, getting enough sleep and physical activity. So we cannot actually do this without health coaches, just like we can't make as much progress as we want to make with health coaching alone without collaboration with clinicians. So
right, exactly. I guess that's another piece of it for me, Chris. That's a point of frustration that I came up against many times in the past, and probably will still in the future to some extent, knowing that my clients probably needs, some next level stuff, but they're having trouble accessing that care, or maybe I don't have a partnership with a doctor that I can recommend them to, something like that. And so it was awesome in this setting to be, we could proactively address things like symptoms starting to become hyper. We could proactively deal with what was coming out on the lab work and what Rob was interpreting there. That's awesome to get to do that in almost real time,
Absolutely. And I mean, we could go on and on. Unfortunately, I have to wrap this up in a minute here, but we're all on the same page there and share the same vision. And that's, of course, for me, why I am training both practitioners and health coaches, because that to have health coaches and clinicians that are trained in the same, not just philosophical framework, but the same practical framework where, they have a shared understanding of how to, of the diagnosis, the treatment, the diet and lifestyle behavior changes, the framework for looking at these conditions and how to intervene. To me, that's where it gets very powerful, because when you can do that in collaboration and you're starting with that shared framework, it gets really exciting, as you have proven with this study. So thank you both for doing this work, and excited to see what is coming next, and for coming onto the show and sharing the results with us.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris, and thank you for giving us the framework to even study in the first place. And and I know you'll continue to support and create the clinicians and health coaches that will carry out the care and the research that we're just beginning now. So yeah, thank you.
Yes. We just wrapped up enrollment for our second cohort of the Adapt Health Coach training program, which was very exciting. The first cohort just graduated in early June here, and just phenomenal results. If you want to check out some of the experiences that people had in the program and how it changed their life, you can go to chriskresser.com/stories. We've collated a number of videos and written stories from people in the program. It's just been super gratifying and rewarding for me to see that. And then we have enrollments for the fall, both the practitioner training program and the health coach program coming up this fall. So you can learn more about those at chriskresser.com. Click on health coaching or functional medicine. And then Rob and Angie, where can people find out more about your work?
Everybody can find me and my partner, Mickey Truscott, over at autoimmunewellness.com. You'll find links to the full articles for the both the AIP IBD and the AIP Hashi study articles. You can find them there. You can find our books. You can find our podcasts. You can find our social media, all the things.
And you'll find a little bit of myself over there too. I do get to write. It's been lucky to be able to partner with Angie and Mickey. And I realized too, and I'll just throw it in there. It's like self-explanatory to me, but the people's symptom burden and quality of life did get radically better. I think I didn't actually say that explicitly because we jumped to thyroid in the podcast, but people got way better in the study.
Yeah, that was one of the main positive finding of the study in some ways. Yeah,
improvement in quality of life and radical decrease in symptom burden, which was amazing. Yeah, I have a collaborative clinic practice, functional medicine, sort of nutrition practice in Charlottesville, Virginia, called Resilient Roots. It's formed out of the structure that was in the ADAPT framework. So I work alongside a nutritionist, and we're using some of the structure that was in the ADAPT framework. So I can't tell people enough how beneficial that program can be. And so we're seeing folks locally in Virginia and actually doing virtual care too, functional medicine care, not full scope medical care. But so if you want to be a new patient of our practice and have been aware of Chris Kresser, we utilize those principles in our clinic. And I also do some podcasts and poetry and other blogs and things on my sort of personal site called A Medicinal Mind. And there's and I keep forgetting about this too, because it was a long time ago, but I do have a ebook, a second version of it too, a free ebook on the website. Was my sort of encyclopedia. It's an abridged version of all the resources that are out there for you to learn about integrative health, functional medicine. And it's got podcasts, it has books, it has blog articles, it has conferences. It's just, there's a wealth of things on there. Even if you're in the space, you're going to find something on there, someone you haven't heard of, and maybe you find a new podcast to listen to. And I updated it last year. I haven't updated it this year, but definitely, sign up for the email list, download, get that ebook and share it with people, because it was my, like I said, encyclopedia of what I found in all my rabbit hole dives during my medical school training to try to find functional medicine. And I was like, I wanted to have something like this to help narrow this down. So that ebook is there for folks if they want to download it.
Great resource. I've seen that and highly recommend it. What's the website, Rob?
Yeah, so it's amedicinalmind.com. It's kind of a play on a beautiful mind, but yeah, amedicinalmind.com.
Great. And I highly recommend those of you who need additional help. And, if Rob and Angie are a good fit for what you're looking for, they're both phenomenal practitioners in their own right. And, can't recommend working with them enough. So thanks everybody for listening. Hope this was inspiring to hear. There's so many phenomenal developments happening in the field right now. It's just so rewarding for me to be a part of all of this. And I know so many of you are passionate about, whether you're considering a career in the health professions, or you're just, again, a citizen scientist and a health advocate and someone who wants to support this movement going forward. We appreciate your help and your advocacy. So thanks for listening. Continue to send in your questions, chriskresser.com/podcast, and we'll talk to you next time. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at kriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/kriskresser or facebook.com/kriskresser L.A.C. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.